School uniforms and why students should wear them have been a huge topic of concern and debate for as long as these uniforms have even been around. While most people argue that wearing uniforms in educational institutions can make people appear all equal, give a sense of community, and even teach discipline, many others argue for the disadvantages of school uniforms rather than the potential advantages. Namely, demanding students to adorn uniforms takes away freedom, are often uncomfortable, can provide a huge financial burden, and they promote conformity over individuality. And the children's self image can actually be very detrimental due to these school uniforms. Thus, while many are in support of these school uniforms for the sense of community, discipline, and overall sense of equality, many studies show the ineffectiveness of school uniforms, as well as the detriment on self esteem, a huge financial burden, and even constitutional contradictions from these school uniforms. Thus, these all hint at the potential disbandment of uniforms and how it can actually be beneficial for children in America. So, most developed countries, like the United States, believe that it is one's right to freedom of expression. Thus, making it mandatory for students to give up their rights is actually constitutionally wrong. According to procon.org, and I quote, the First Amendment of the United States guarantees that all individuals have the right to express themselves freely. So the United States court case of Tinker versus Des Moines Independent County School District of 1969 actually states that, quote, it can hardly be argued that either students or teachers shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate. In other words, hinting that school uniforms actually take away our right to express ourselves, for clothing and attire is actually one way to do so. And furthermore, in another court case of Richards v. Thurston in 1970, which revolved around a boy being forced to conformatively shave his head and have short hair for a boy, actually deemed that it was not constitutional for a compelled conformity to conventional standards of appearance and was not justifiable or necessary for educational purposes. So it is not only that the demand of uniform is unconstitutional, but goes against the rulings of the Supreme Court, in a way making them potentially un-American. Another practical concern is that the financial burden the parents must go through to fund these school uniforms. So, psychologist Rebecca Smithers stated that once in the United Kingdom, for instance, school uniforms and parents have correlated to an increased financial burden among people in the UK, for they have spent reportedly millions of pounds in school uniforms, and being so that schools and suppliers for these school uniforms often work together, these uniforms can often be overpriced, for schools often require the name brand uniform, which is way overpriced, that can further ostracize and suppress the poor, which is counterintuitive if the goal is to make them appear more equal. Now, on the other side of practicality, school uniforms are often a lot less comfortable than normal uniforms. They can be tight and unadjustable to different weather conditions, and temperatures in the winter and summer can be unbearable. Now research from psychologist Amanda Merliger surveyed a few students as well as parent-teacher staff separately regarding how comfortable school uniforms can be. While this teacher and parent staff were surveyed separately, they were surveyed on whether they thought or not the school uniforms were comfortable. Now, when asked about the summer uniform attire, most parents and teachers said 70% of them thought that they were comfortable. However, on the contradicting side, both boys and girls students wearing these uniforms had a whopping 83% chance saying that they were actually uncomfortable, with two reasons for the boys being that their shorts were too low and bagging down, or that their blazers were way too hot, and a whopping 13 reasons for the girls, such as it was see-through, hot, too revealing, being restrictive, and a really, really uncomfortable clothing. When participants were asked about the winter clothing, the parent-teacher staff said that 65% of them believed that they were comfortable. However, on the contrary, a whopping 91% of students reported that they were actually uncomfortable. For the boys said that the blazers made it very, very restricting and was very heavy, while the girls acknowledged that their stockings and kilts were both either really heavy are very restrictive and allowed parts to be shown that they did not, in fact, want to be shown. So, in other words, the school uniforms are actually a lot more ineffective than people may seem because of the uncomfortability of how children are and the potential revealing nature of these clothings despite being meant to promote obedience, discipline, modesty, and overall equality. Now, according to the New York Times articles, uniforms actually promote conformity instead of individuality. So, a sense of individuality is key in democratic societies and should be nurtured when young. So, schools that encourage and appreciate diversity, enforcing standardized dressing could actually be very counterproductive. According to the 2006 New York Times article, "Do Clothes Define Us?" Now, especially especially since the clothes are gendered, such as skirts for the boys and skirts for the girls and slacks for the boys, many people who are non-binary, gender fluid, or transgender may in fact feel ostracized, which leads to the ever-growing problem of transgender and gender rights in America. Thus, promoting a more equal sense of community is actually being counterintuitive and being hindered by these school uniforms by ostracizing these groups of people. Now, according to psychologist Lisa Flam, people do not feel like they look best in their school uniforms. This is due to the fact that uniforms fit a mold for certain body types, and curvier or plus-size students often feel out of place and uncomfortable, and wearing uniforms tend to lead them to compare themselves to other students that do not fit the normal mold, leading to a lot of psychological problems in the future, such as depression, body dysmorphia, and even eating disorders, based on the insecurities they feel during school. Now, while there are many benefits to wearing school uniforms, I firmly believe that there are much more disadvantages than advantages to using them, and hence I urge that parents look at this public and school districts to heavily reconsider their use of uniforms. And by doing so, they can provide a much, much safer, more inclusive community by doing so, and eliminate any